Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. This is the Insight segment. I'm Harold Fisher. His case has captured the headlines for weeks as his family continues to plead for his safe return. The courts have said the Trump administration needs to facilitate his trip back home, and a U.S. member of Congress traveled to El Salvador hoping to get Kilmar Abrego Garcia released. Well, that hasn't happened. And we continue to look at the lingering saga of Kilmar Abrego Garcia and why his case has garnered a rallying cry for justice. But it also has many wondering if they could be the next Abrego Garcia. It's an immigration law discussion with all of the twists and turns as President Trump looks to deport American prisoners to El Salvador. My guests are Dr. Oye Awolowo, DC's U.S. Shadow Representative, and attorney A.K. Poku, the immigrant's lawyer. Thank you both for joining this conversation again. We knew that we were going to have to revisit this, but there have been so many things that have changed since we last spoke. Again, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, 29-year-old husband, father of three. He was deported on March 15th from the U.S. in what the Trump administration has called an administrative error, and he is currently in a notorious El Salvadoran prison. The Trump administration has claimed that he is an MS-13 gang member. He has never been convicted or charged with the crime. So there's so many moving parts to this, but let's talk first of all about your reaction to what has happened just over the past few days. AK, I'll start with you and the unsuccessful visit to El Salvador by Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen.
All right. So, as you all may know, this is an ongoing debate, really heated. This man, Abrego Garcia, apparently granted the relief of withholding of removal in immigration court in the United States in 2019. And that relief is granted to people to prevent their deportation to specific, countries or to a specific country. And the exact country which the immigration court ruled that he would be in danger if he were deported to that country was the country that he was deported to without any warrant for his arrest, without any cause for his detention, and he was just removed without relitigate. Even if the government felt that there was a problem with the prior removal, with the prior ruling that he should not be granted withholding of removal, the government should have gone through the procedural mechanism for that to try to have that ruling overturned. And this is exactly what the district court said, that the recourse to challenging a court order is not to violate that court order. There's a procedural mechanism that you have to follow. And so you cannot just, brazenly disobey a court order claiming that it's deficient. Yes, I did see the news that Senator went there. I'm not sure that would have yielded any, honestly, results.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Same thing. Do you think that? I mean, what could Senator Van Hollen hope to achieve? I mean, certainly, and certainly not saying that it was performative, but do you think that he really believed that he could have at least been able to see Abrego Garcia, to talk to him, to get proof of life, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, so first of all, Harold, I want to thank you for inviting us an additional time talking about this very issue. It was almost like yesterday we were talking about how we weren't able to predict what the Trump administration was going to do. And we're seeing like every single day since our last conversation, just how much in danger some of our non-citizen residents are. In terms of the senator's visit to to El Salvador, it actually follows the Salvadorian president's trip to the White House,
Right.
and how they were basically saying that there was no way they could return him, and essentially Kilmar is stuck in El Salvador. So I felt that the senator's visit to El Salvador was important. It brought a lot of light to the conversation, and I do believe more activism is needed. Right now, we're seeing the president not only defy court orders, he's also using wartime legislation like the Aliens Enemies Act to essentially deport people without due process. That was a wartime act from 200 years ago against France, and it seems as if President Trump is using that against all folks who are non-white immigrants and getting rid of them without due process, without any sense of knowing where they're at. We're talking about family members who haven't been able to reach certain people. I know we're talking about Kilmar, but there's another gentleman in New York who's a teenager who was essentially arrested off of collateral arrest and has also been deported without due process. So I believe that the senator's action was important, not only for the reasons of bringing light to the issue, but also trying to get some accountability for not only the El Salvadorian president, but also the American president, as well as we're seeing funding from America paying El Salvador to house immigrants. And we're seeing a financial incentive for the Salvadorian president to continue taking in people without due process.
Mm-hmm. AK, I asked you this before, a month or so ago when we talked, and I'm going to ask again, with the understanding that there has been a visible change in the kind of aggressiveness that we are seeing, people literally being plucked off the streets. What have your clients been saying about the kind of change in tempo as it relates to the arrests that have been made?
I guess the fear has not really gone away. There's still a lot of fear. Now we're seeing a lot more focus on students, right, who are also getting their CVIS records terminated, people who are involved in activism having their records terminated. And so there's still the fear, but there's really the fear of the uncertainty as to which demographic this is going to shift to soon, and when.
Yeah, and Oye, I think she makes a really important point, because we know just over the past 2 weeks or so, students from Howard University who were here under legal visas have had those visas revoked, and they have been removed and moved through this deportation process. The University of Maryland, George Washington University, Georgetown. These aren't students whose visas that have overstayed their visas. These are students that were legally here, and then having these things revoked. And I think that has to add an additional layer of fear. If you believe that you are here legally, having a visa issued by the United States, and you've been in undergrad school or grad school for a year, getting good grades, not breaking the law, and then to have it revoked and being snatched, that's got to be a horrifying feeling.
Yes, it is. And I must mention that the students who are having their visas revoked and their CVIS records terminated are people who have had some encounter with law enforcement or have been involved in some type of activism. And so even when people have had encounters with law enforcement, even minor, infractions, and these have been dismissed by courts, or there's been a nolle prosequi, failure to prosecute because there's perhaps no evidence against these people. These people have had their CVIS terminated. And it's a really big contradiction. President Trump was saying during the time he was campaigning that he would look at a merit-based form of process for immigrants who are in school in the US, and that there could be the possibility of these people being allowed to stay or being given some type of stay. And then suddenly these people are having their visas revoked. There are even, students who are victims of certain types of crimes. And so long as they've had some encounter with law enforcement, these people are also seeing their CVs terminated.
Yeah, that has got to be a very, very unsettling feeling. And I just can't imagine it. I don't know whether either one of you saw the video that was released today about an ICE agent literally breaking into the car window of a woman in Massachusetts. That is, gosh, how far, Oye, are you willing? Do you believe the administration is willing to go? Please unmute your mic.
Yes. There's no depths of where the depravity of this administration can go. They already talked about deporting American citizens, natural-born citizens, to El Salvador. They've already have taken somebody who ICE wasn't even looking for. They grabbed them as collateral arrest, and they're not even telling the family members where they're at. We're talking about students with visas getting revoked based off their political ideologies, and we're seeing essentially gaslighting from the White House. I mean, we had Stephen Miller say that they got a resounding victory after receiving a 9-0 a Supreme Court decision against them. So they're not only violating court orders, they're misrepresenting the findings of the courts. So and it's almost like they're doing 100 things a day to distract you from their true objectives, whether it's economic issues, whether it's foreign policy, now it's even in immigrant situations, and basically deporting people illegally without due process. I mean, we're seeing defamation. The press secretary called Kilmer a known gang member and then turned around saying it was administrative error. And then the president of El Salvador is putting smiley faces talking about his situation on Twitter. I mean, the depths where they can go is something I can't even guess anymore, because I'm always proven wrong.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, AK.
Harold, let me add to what Oye is saying. When I read the initial judgment by Paula Zinnis, U.S. District Court of Maryland, she was the person that the case was brought to at first. And in the judgment, the judge said that, the court said that there was basically no evidence that this man was truly a member of the MS-13 gang, and that he was just wearing, I believe, a Chicago Bull hoodie. And there was also a prior allegation from the government during his withholding of, his asylum claim or his asylum proceedings, that he belonged to an MS-13 gang, which was in the western side of Long Island, and he had actually never lived there. And so all of those things show that this man probably was never an MS-13 gang member. But the argument that the government, where's the feedback from? Is that from me?
Go ahead.
Okay. So the argument that the government is making is also very interesting, because the grant of withholding of removal, again, it just says that don't remove this person. Well, first of all, this person is removable or is deportable, but don't remove him to this specific country because there is danger that he could be hurt, right? The government is saying that, oh, well, this person still had a removal order. The only thing was don't remove him to that country. In any case, this Abrego Garcia had stated that there was a gang in El Salvador called, I believe, 18th Street, that he was fearful of. And now the government is saying, well, you said we shouldn't remove him to that country, El Salvador, but the gang that he's afraid of no longer exists. And so then they're trying to say, well, then we can't deport him there. But the court order still stands, even if.
Hold that point, AK. I'll let you finish. I've got to take a break, and we want to remind our listeners that you can hear this in every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on WHUR.com. The original Quiet Storm with Raheem Devon is next on WHUR. I'm Harold Fisher. This conversation continues on Sirius XM, channel 141 and 96.3 HD2 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our conversation about the latest twists and turns regarding U.S. deportation of undocumented immigrants. My guests are Dr. Oye Awolowo, D.C. U.S. Shadow Representative, and attorney A.K. Poku, the immigrant's lawyer. A.K., please continue the point you were making before the break.
Okay.
Well, let me just say, to pick up, even if we look at all the many machinations of all that, all that is happening, and let's just talk about where we are today. Another judge has in DC is threatening to hold the Trump administration in contempt. Now, you're not a constitutional attorney, you are an immigration attorney, but from what does that exactly mean? And perhaps, and maybe the question may be better for Oye, but whoever can kind of address that, what might that mean?
Well, I could start. So if a court gives an order and a party decides to violate that court order or disobey that court order, then the court could hold that party in contempt of the court order. And so, I believe it was Judge Boasberg who has held them has said that there's probable cause for contempt, that they actually, the Trump administration violated his order not to deport some Venezuelans to Venezuela under the Aliens Enemies Act. The Trump administration is now, was saying that, they had already crossed international waters at the time the judgment came, but I believe that the judge sees that those things are not true, and so they violated the order, right? So once you are deemed to be in probable contempt of court, then you are given an opportunity to purge the contempt. You have to show cause as to why you are not in contempt of court, of the court of the court orders. And then, if the judge finds that you are in contempt, then there could be penalties that you have to pay, fines, orders, to make good the situation.
So that is fine for your regular citizens, but we are talking about the administration of the President of the United States, Oye, and I think it's safe to say that the Trump administration could say, okay, hold us in contempt. So what?
Right. What we're seeing right now is a judge trying to put some checks and balances. In the Constitution, the country's foundation, there's an executive branch, there's a legislative branch, and there's a judicial branch. They're all supposed to have checks and balances over each other. One makes the laws, one enforces the laws, one interprets the laws. And politically, what we're seeing right now is the executive branch that feels there's no checks around. They can do whatever they want. They can ignore whatever orders. They can control Congress, do as they please. So we're seeing some local judges, some district judges, some federal judges really trying to stand up and see what they can do to corral this administration. They've been back in power for less than 3 months, and they've already trying to break down the essence of America, essence of what it means to be an American citizen. And this judge is trying to step up to do so. What we're also seeing is people standing up and protesting, marching, truth to power. We're seeing some Congress members really speaking out about what's going on. And I believe that this judge is really trying to at least start that process of judicial checks. And we need to see what happens. My guess is that the Trump administration is still trying to plow through on their agenda. But if more judges in the Supreme Court truly continue to file contempt charges, whether it's incarceration, whether it's fines, we just put pressure on this administration to not ignore the law, then I believe we will see some of the dictatorial tactics cease a little bit.
Let me ask you this, AK, about some really fundamental things, because I remember the last time we talked about what rights do these immigrants have when they are approached on the street. But now, if you were literally in your home, I mean, what legal advice do you give to someone who believes that they are here legally and they are in their home and ICE shows up on your front porch knocking without a warrant? I mean, what are they supposed to do?
Okay, so according to the Constitution, the Fourth Amendment, it gives the right to be protected against unlawful, unreasonable searches and seizures, right? So the Fourth Amendment guarantees the right against unlawful searches and seizures. And the courts have ruled time and time again that the Fourth Amendment, you have the highest protection when you are in your home. When you are in your home, then you in your private home, then you have protection against that. And so if ICE comes to knock on your door and they don't have a warrant that has been signed by a judge with your name and your address, then you have the right not to open the door. ICE can only come in if you consent, unless obviously there are exigent circumstances. But even with the case you mentioned, the Maryland case where ICE was found breaking into the woman's glass.
Right, that was in Massachusetts, but yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry, yes, that was in Massachusetts, in New Bedford, actually. There was another one in Maryland. Okay, so even in that case, ICE had apparently visited the woman's home twice, and she had declined to open up her doors. And so I think they were pursuing her and then got her outside where everybody's game, right? Because if you are driving and law enforcement pulls you over, you have to stop. And there's less privacy in your car than at home. And so that's the distinction there.
I think that's a really important point, because I don't think a lot of people know that, where some people would consider their car as safe, as secure, as legally binding as their home. So with the mistakes that we have seen being made in some cases, where you may have people who are legal citizens, for example, one of the things that had been reported about a month or so ago was that there were people who were from Puerto Rico, which of course is a U.S. territory, were arrested because of their Latino accents, and as a result, they were eventually let go, but they had been held for many hours. Are we supposed to just walk around with our passports now?
So the legal standard for ICE questioning or approaching somebody, and that legal standard is that there must be reasonable suspicion that the person is in violation of U.S. immigration laws, or is doing something, breaking some type of, or is here illegally or unlawfully. However, reasonable suspicion should not be based on ethnicity or racial profiling. There are other things that the court will look at. I mean, again, I've said it, as a matter of practicality, if you don't want to be detained or harassed, then you have the option of carrying your U.S. passports around. It's a choice that people can decide to make. Otherwise, if you are picked up and the government doesn't believe that you are who you say you are, then you could be detained. And if you are not careful, you could end up somewhere else. And then it becomes a debate as to whether you're supposed to be returned, or the Supreme Court just said, oh, facilitate, your return is supposed to be facilitated, right? So bottom line is that, everybody has to do what they can to protect themselves. And if that means carrying your evidence of legal status on you, then you should do that. In fact, just last week, this law went into effect, the alien registration law, which mandates all aliens to register their presence with the US government and to carry proof of their registration, evidence of registration. And so now we're yet to see how that will play out, but that means that could empower ICE to start checking, well, where are your documents? Show me your documents. And if you don't have that, then it becomes a problem. Obviously, US citizens are not required to register under that law. Green card holders are already registered, but generally that's what we're seeing. So if people feel safer carrying that documents, then they should.
Oh, yeah. What are your thoughts about President Trump floating the idea of deporting American citizens who have committed violent crimes instead of keeping them in prisons here in the United States? I think we lost Oye. When he comes back, we'll tackle that question. I do want to talk more about Abrego Garcia. You had some thoughts just about, where we are with that.
Yeah. So, the case has gone through an interesting trajectory. It started at the U.S. District Court of Maryland, Paul Azinis. Then it went to the judge at the U.S. District Court of Maryland ruled in favor of Abrego Garcia. Said, well, facilitates the guy's return. This was a lawless arrest. You should not have taken him to that country. You violated court orders. The government appealed to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, saying that there should be a stay of the district court order to return Abrego Garcia to the United States. The Court of Appeals denied the government's stay and said, go on and bring the man back into the United States. Then the Trump administration now filed to the Supreme Court and said, look, just, can you do something about this? Then the Supreme Court ruled against the government 9-0 and said, first of all, this was a lawless thing that the government did. They should not have taken Abrego Garcia to the country that the law prohibited his return to. And I really like what Judge Bosberg said in the Aliens Enemies judgment, where he said, the Constitution does not tolerate willful disobedience of judicial orders, especially by officials of a coordinate branch who have sworn an oath to uphold it. Again, so the Supreme Court said that they did not necessarily want to meddle in, foreign affairs, right? Foreign affairs issues are the president and the executive branch's prerogative. Judiciary should not be involved. And so what the Supreme Court said was that they should facilitate the return of Abrego Garcia to the United States. Now, Trump administration want to reinterpret the meaning of facilitate, and they've narrowed down what facilitate means. And they're saying, oh, it just means remove all local obstacles, but it doesn't mean bring him back. Because now they claim he's not in US custody and they have no control over what happens. And yet evidence from the ruling show that this is not true. The government has taken people to El Salvador, and the government at all times retains control over these people until there's a statement that the court made. The government said that the use of El Salvador jail was a tool in their toolkit, and so they could utilize it to achieve their agenda, right? And the agreement they have with El Salvador is that these people are going to be kept in those prisons until the U.S. determines what the final disposition of these people are. And so
right, exactly. I mean, it's almost kind of like, legally speaking, it's kind of like, uh, the terrorists who were arrested after 9/11. Where a lot of them,
Guantanamo.
right, they were sent to Guantanamo Bay, and there was no disposition. I guess to your point, AK, and this is a layperson's question, because the use of the term facilitate by the U.S. Supreme Court, and anyone who pays any attention whatsoever to how the courts speak, it often can be ambiguous. It can often be confusing. Um, and sometimes in this particular case, all of the legalese doesn't work. This is a legal question. Why can't we just get a statement from the Supreme Court that says bring him home? Why can't we make, and I know a lot of people may say this may be a naive thing, but considering the times in which we are in, why not just say get it done? You can have your legal paragraphs and all of the legal explanations, but at the bottom, why not have New York Sonia Sotomayor put that New York spin on it and say, son, get it done. Talk to me about that. Why don't we see clear language from the courts?
Again, it's because of the separation of powers, right? There's an issue of foreign policy, and the courts or the judiciary does not want to interfere with the president's role as somebody who takes care of foreign policy. And so, because there's foreign policy involved, they cannot give the president clear directions that bring him home, because then that means that the court's judgment could be struck down as ultra vires. And that's what usually courts prevent. They don't want that to happen. They want their judgments to be upheld. And so if you want your judgment to be upheld, you have to give these judgments within the confines of the law, and you should not sidestep what your boundaries are. So I think the Supreme Court is being careful so that there's no issue of, oh, that was an unlawful judgment by the Supreme Court, because of the separation of powers and just not allowing the judiciary to get involved with matters of foreign policy in that regard.
Oh, yeah, I did want to get your opinion about something that the president floated earlier this week about having U.S. citizens who have committed violent crimes in the U.S. and deporting them to El Salvador.
Yes, I've heard that same thing, and not only me, but members of the non-citizen or even minority community are very concerned about that. We're seeing not only the racial profiling of people in our judicial or our criminal justice system, but we also don't know how he's going to carry that out. Is he going to send people from the Latinx community to El Salvador? Is he going to send Black people to El Salvador? And really, we're seeing, the stretching of the law and a political battle. We're over here talking about the authority that the Supreme Court has over the presidency. And to be honest, I don't even know if there would be any type of language that would compel President Trump to do the right thing. So I believe he's stretching his political power on all branches of the government. And I'm especially concerned about the impacts of not only citizens being deported to other countries and prisons, but also what happens when they're released. Are they going to just be thrown on the street of El Salvador if they will be sent down there? Or are they going to just hold people down there without trial like they're doing currently? And are they really going to exhaust the resources and increase possible recidivism by keeping folks who are incarcerated away from their social support systems and opportunities for them to reintegrate themselves into society upon release?
AK, I wanted to make sure that we were clear for our listeners who may be concerned about being arrested by ICE, detained, and possibly deported. You say that there are rights, but as we have seen in a lot of the reporting lately, that those things may not necessarily apply. So, with that said, if you are approached on the street by ICE, What should you say? What should you do? What should you not say? What should you not do?
Okay. Well, if you're approached by ICE on the streets, it just depends on your immigration status. There are various types of people or immigrants in the United States. We have, first of all, U.S. citizens. They have the highest rights, right? These are people who are either born in the United States or automatically acquired U.S. citizenship by reason of descent, or others who are naturalized U.S. citizens, meaning they were born abroad and then came into the U.S. and acquired, applied for U.S. citizenship. So you have U.S. citizens. You have green card holders. These are lawful permanent residents who have the right to live and work in the United States. And then you have visa holders, or people who are in some type of status. So you could have non-immigrant, people who are on non-immigrant visas, like students, F1 visas, visitors, such people. And then you could also have people who are in legal status but don't necessarily have status, like asylee status. They've been granted asylum, those types of people, or who have come in on parole. They have permission to be here. And then finally, you have the undocumented immigrants. These are people who either came in unlawfully or they came in with a visa and they have overstayed the visa. And so the advice depends on who we're looking at, right? Because if it's a US citizen, then they can just state that they're a US citizen if ICE is asking or questioning them about their immigration status. And ICE is required under law, DHS, to verify that this person is truly a US citizen before they detain them. Their database may not always be accurate because there's reports that they have deported US citizens in the past, they detained US citizens in the past mistakenly. Green card holders, under law, they are required to, I believe under Section 264E of the Immigration and Nationality Act, they're required to always bear on them their green cards. So again, that if you're a green card holder, then you should know that this is what you need to do. If you are here on a temporary visa, you should have your I-94 on you. So there's just so many different permutations, right? Depending on your status, then there's the advice. But obviously, for all these categories of people, the Constitution doesn't change. The Constitution applies to documented immigrants, undocumented immigrants, US citizens alike, and unlawful people who are here unlawfully, and so they have the right to remain silent. So if you're not sure what to say, as an immigrant, there could be that language barrier, or there's just so much fear. You can always invoke your right to remain silent, and then ask that you want your lawyer present, if you are unable to advocate for yourself. But I usually recommend that, especially the people who are undocumented, or who are undocumented or have some type of process going, should speak with an immigration attorney so that they can understand exactly what to say and what to present. Because one of the other things to be careful of is that if ICE stops you and you are undocumented, right, telling them about your place of birth could implicate you. Because one of the things that they prove when you go to immigration court, the burden is on the US government to prove alienage, to show that you are not in the US. And the case cannot proceed if they don't prove alienage. So that's one of the things that attorneys will tell you. Don't just go blabbing about everything and anything. If you don't know what to say, silence is your best form of protection.
Let me ask you this, and then I'll let Oye have a final word. I think this is important. If you are here illegally, but you marry an American citizen, then that makes you a citizen, does it not?
Is that to me or to?
Yes, to you.
To me. Okay, so if you're here illegally or unlawfully and you're married to a US citizen, you are not a US citizen. US citizenship is not transmitted through marriage. You have to independently apply for and be granted US citizenship. And in fact, there's actually no process of just obtaining US citizenship by just because you will have to become, first of all, a green card holder, and then you can transition to become a U.S. citizen. You cannot make that jump. And so if you're married to a U.S. citizen, even if you're here unlawfully, you can apply for a green card depending on how you came into the U.S. If you came into the U.S. without inspection, then the process is a little more difficult. If you came in with a visa, with inspection, you are admitted or paroled, then you can apply for your green card in the United States without having to leave.
Yeah, that's really important, because I think there are a lot of people who believe, and we have seen through popular culture, yeah, well, you marry an American citizen and you become, a citizen, and so you're safe. Well, now we know, the truth about that. Oh, yeah, I only have a minute or so. No, go ahead, real quick.
I want to put in perspective. Even Abrego Garcia's wife is a U.S. citizen, and
Right.
he has 2 U.S. citizen children. So, I mean, that right there should show you that there are some complexities. It's not very straightforward, like, oh, you're married to a U.S. citizen, and so automatically you're safe. Look at Abrego Garcia.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you for dispelling that myth that a lot of people seem to, believe. Oh, yeah, just a final word from you about just where we are and the difficulties in the days, weeks, even months ahead on this issue. Oh, yeah, please. Go ahead. Oh, yeah. I think we may have lost him again.
Okay, I'm sorry. I apologize for all the technical difficulties.
Go ahead. I've got a minute. Go ahead.
Okay, very good. First of all, I want to say thank you for allowing me on, and thank you for fighting through my technical difficulties. The most important thing for the people to know is to know the facts, know the laws, get in touch with legal representation, because the news is trying to scare you. We had someone who went to get his immigration worked on, and he tried to get his citizenship, and he was arrested during his appointment. So please, please, please get in touch with AK Poku. Please stay in touch with the folks who are doing legal representation, because there's no substitute for that, and keep yourself and your community safe. We will get past our current endeavors, but more importantly, advocate and make sure that the people around you who are most vulnerable also have a voice through you as well. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you both for joining this important conversation. We will continue to stay in touch with you, because this obviously does not end here. Lots to discuss as it continues to weave in and out of the court system and the political discussion. Thank you again so very, very much. That is the Daily Drum for this Thursday, April 17th. I'm Harold Fisher. Good night.